Morning, everybody, and happy Friday to all you magnificent melonheads of the world. Today is June 28th, 2024. And well, the top story this morning, let's get this out of the way. Last night's much anticipated presidential debate, the rematch between Walter Matthau and Jack Lemmon. We finally got that one last night. And well, it didn't disappoint. Let's be honest. Most people who were watching were tuning in because they were wondering what was going to come out of Biden's mouth. Was the guy just going to keel over on the stage? He didn't keel over on the stage, but he did everything but. The word panic is being thrown around in left-wing press this morning as well as in right-wing press. It started as soon as the debate was over yesterday. You could see it in the CNN commentators' eyes. Uh, Whatever happened last night, it's pretty clear that Joe Biden will not win the next presidential election. I don't think he's even going to be in it. The party is going to scramble to replace him right now. Look, the guy was just not there. He was not incoherent. He was wide-eyed. He had no idea what was going on, where he was. He was stuttering. He was talking about topics that weren't even on the questions that were asked. The party was trying to do damage control in the middle of the debate, saying that, oh no, he's got a cold and that's what's going on. And, hey, maybe the guy has a cold. I mean, look, sometimes I sneeze, and instead of a chew, what comes out is we finally beat Medicare. So, it could sound a lot like a sneeze sometimes. Maybe that's what happened. So I totally, no. Come on, guys. Look, this is elder abuse at this point. You could even see it after the debate was over. Trump just immediately walked off the stage. Biden sat there frozen at the podium. You could see as the camera was zooming out while Dr. Jill came out on stage, took him by the elbow, and helped him walk off stage. So Biden is done here, guys. That doesn't necessarily mean Trump is in. All right. And keep that in mind as well. I don't think Donald Trump necessarily won that debate. Time won that debate, right? Joe Biden was defeated by time last night. I don't think Trump necessarily had a good performance, although the one thing I would give Trump credit for is it looks like the guy may have finally learned to keep his mouth shut because that's all he needed to do was win last night, was let Joe Biden talk. And that's a pretty tall order for Donald Trump. That's something he was unable to do in 2020. And so he actually kept his mouth shut most of the time. So it's a personal growth story when you think about it. The only time the two even really started to bicker and argue was when they were talking about golf handicaps. Um, so, yeah, what happened last night, I don't think it was any great victory by Trump. It was certainly a disaster for the Biden campaign and the DNC. And look, if we're gonna bring this one out, uh, they knew that was coming, and that's why we had this debate when they had it. This debate was the earliest in the election cycle that it has ever been held. I think because the Democrats knew they were going to need to replace Biden, and they needed to find that out before the convention. So this is it, almost it was a little scripted, and it's a wild card now. We don't know how this is going to end. Are they going to come and are they going to throw Newsom in there now? How are they going to do that? They didn't have really a primary. He didn't run against them. Are they just going to anoint someone? I don't know, but it's going to be messy. But the one thing we can take away is I'm going to go out on a limb here and say Joe Biden definitely will not win this election. That doesn't mean Donald Trump will win it, although he's the favorite right now. All right, now let's get on with the business news going on this morning, and there is plenty of it. We've got personal consumption expenditures just came out. The PCE inflation, the Fed's preferred measure of inflation, and it's showing inflation slowing. In some metrics, there was no inflation at all, and in one of them, still a little bit of work to do, but it was pretty much as expected. So no surprises in PCE this morning. I mean, it was exactly as expected, and the market is kind of yawning at it as well. Let's get into some numbers. Headline 2.6% year over year. That's down from 2.7% last month, pretty much as expected. On a month over month basis, it was actually 0.0%. So no inflation in, I think this was for June, according to PCE. Now that's down from 0.3%. Again, it was as expected. Core also came in at 2.6% year over year, down from 2.8, in line with expectations. And on a monthly basis, core was 0.1%, down from 0.3, again, as expected. So this was no news in this inflation report. The one thing I would point out is a lot of folks were saying, we mentioned earlier this week, that the Japanese were planning on intervening in their currency market because the yen continues to decline. It actually hit 161 to the dollar yesterday. but they were saying they're going to wait until PCE because they were saying maybe PCE comes in low and that causes a little bit of a weakening in the dollar because of a more dovish Federal Reserve, which means, hey, maybe the Japanese wouldn't have to intervene in their currency market. Well, they didn't get that with the PCE report today. So I think the biggest impact from this inflation report is going to be on the actions of the Japanese finance ministry and central bank, more so than what the Federal Reserve is going to do. Also going on this morning, Nike is out. We've got another retail stock down about 15%. Almost every day this week, we've had some company announce some kind of a profit warning, sending their shares lower by 15% pre-market. It was FedEx, it was Walgreens. Who else was it? We had Hooters, and now this morning, Levi's yesterday. This morning, it's Nike. Nike's warned of low single-digit sales declines this year. That's versus expectations of 2% growth, and Nike stock is down 15% ahead of the opening bell. That is the struggling consumer buying less stuff because the cost of life has just gone up so much they can't afford to buy this stuff from Nike. And they're also worried Nike might be losing market share to Adidas as well. That kind of came out of nowhere. Another story we got this morning, we actually got some good news from Apple. iPhone shipments to China appear to be up about 40%. Now, earlier this year, iPhone shipments were in steep declines, especially in January and February. They were looking really bad. Apple's first quarter numbers and their fourth quarter numbers were really lousy. Things in China are slowing down significantly, but they turned a corner in March, and it looks like that growth has continued. Apple made some very steep price cuts in China, and ever since they've done that, the sales have been picking up. So it seems the solution to higher prices was higher prices. And so Apple's moving more phones, although Huawei continues to gain market share. We got another interesting story this morning from L'Oreal, one of the biggest cosmetics makers in the world. They're forecasting slower global growth for the cosmetics industry. They had previously said 5% global growth was expected. Now they're saying 4.5% to 5%, lowering that lower end, and they're citing weakness in China. Now that's pretty interesting because they call it the lipstick index. It says cosmetic sales actually do pretty well during a recession. People tend to, cut out bigger discretionary purchases, but something small like a tube of lipstick gives you that little dopamine drip of doing something nice for yourself without breaking the budget. So, the lipstick index, cosmetic sales doing well in a recession, it's not really holding up in China right now. Remember the wealth effect. When people's homes go down in value, they spend less money on consumer items because they feel less wealthy. And well, China has a very strong wealth effect because the average Chinese household has so much of their money tied up in their homes or their apartments and real estate. So it's possible that this lipstick index, whatever's happening in China, might be so bad that even the cosmetic, that phenomenon of people splurging on cosmetics during times of recession, maybe even that isn't holding up. L'Oreal stock was down a little bit on that news. We finally got some numbers from Walgreens. It turns out we talked about this yesterday. Walgreens was planning on reviewing for closure some of their stores. They didn't say how many. They used the phrase a significant number. Well, Macro Edge is out this morning saying that number could be as high as 2,150 Walgreens pharmacy locations. And that means about 57,000 workers losing their jobs if that comes to fruition, if the number is that high. And I would point out, guys, we're not talking about low wage cashiers and retail jobs only. We're talking about pharmacists, a very well paying six-figure full-time jobs, thousands of them, tens of thousands of them going away. So the macro story, it's a lot like what we saw last night in the debate. People are starting to believe their eyes and ears, right? We were told cheap fakes. We were told, no, even I have trouble keeping up with him, and his energy levels are so great, and he's sharper than he ever was. We all knew that was not the case. Much like we all know the economy is slowing, even though we keep being told the problem is our bad vibes, and no, you just listen to too many doomers on YouTube. No, it's people are starting to wake up and believe what their eyes and ears are telling them, and the messages of the party are kind of falling flat. And the last one I want to talk about today, we got some potentially very big news out of the Supreme Court yesterday. It didn't get a lot of coverage because of the debate, but the Purdue Pharmaceutical settlement, that $6 billion settlement from the opioid epidemic that Purdue Pharma had reached, The Supreme Court threw that out. And the Supreme Court is basically saying that the court had no authority to grant immunity to the Sackler family, who owns Purdue Pharma, as part of that deal. Now, part of that deal, it was a $6 billion settlement. Purdue Pharma put that money out there for, benefits for the victims. But part of that deal in exchange for that $6 billion was language in the court decision that said nobody is allowed to sue the Sackler family anymore, that this is basically the end of it. Well, the Supreme Court just ruled that the court had no standing to do that. They can't just say nobody can sue this family anymore because they wrote a $6 billion check. And of course, a lot of that money, that $6 billion, Purdue Pharma was just going to file for bankruptcy and never end up paying it anyway. So the victims were going to get nothing or very little, pennies on the dollar. Well, the court threw that out. And it was interesting because it was a split decision, 5-4, and it was not along ideological lines. You actually had Neil Gorsuch, a Trump judge, issuing the majority opinion, and you had Brett Kavanaugh, also a Trump judge, issuing the dissenting opinion. So this was not a left-right. The judges were all over the place on this one. This was a very controversial decision, and there's going to be a lot of fallout in future bankruptcy hearings about this one. I honestly, I haven't really had a chance to really parse this and think about what it means, but there's a lot of talk in the press that this thing is going to echo for quite a while in bankruptcy court, affecting other companies and other industries. And with all that, why don't we shrink my big melon of a head and let's get into some of these stories today, shall we? And guys, don't forget that like button for the algo. It really helps. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button because we'll be back in the office next week after my vacation. We do this one every day. The S&P 500 is currently up 14 points ahead of the opening bell, about 0.25%. We had a little bit of volatility here when PCE came out, but it was really a nothing burger there. Still in positive territory, gave up some of their earlier gains. The Dow, meanwhile, is up 25 points, 0.06% higher. Again, a little bit of wobble here on that PCE reading, but pretty much unchanged. Stocks a little bit higher ahead of the open. And the NASDAQ probably having a bigger reaction than anything to this PCE report. The NASDAQ was up 100 points and change earlier. Now it's down to just 46 points higher, or 0.25% higher, giving up about half its gains on that PCE report. The Dixie, meanwhile, is marginally lower here, 105.88. That's down 2 basis points. Again, not really moving here on the day. And looking over at the bond market, we've got mostly lower yields. The 30-year is at 4.415. That's down about 1 basis point. The 10-year is down 2 points, 4.268% for the 10-year. The 2-year is yielding 4.679. That's down almost 4 points. And the 1 month is at 5.366. That is up a couple of points this morning, actually. The 1 month has gone from 5.30 to 5.36 here. Actually, a decent move in the 1 month, considering the Fed pretty much still has it anchored at 5.25. Looking over at commodities, looks like metals are doing okay this morning. Spot gold is at $23.36. That's up $8.54 this morning, about a third of 1%. Spot silver, meanwhile, at $29.56, having a really good morning. That's up 2% here, 58 cents higher for spot silver. Congratulations to the stackers. I like the shiny. September copper futures are up 1.6% at $4.42. October platinum futures at 1,028, up 2%. And September palladium futures at 967. That's up 4.3% this morning. Meanwhile, August futures for WTI crude are at 81.94. Oil's up another 20 cents this morning. Oil prices continuing to chip away, moving slightly higher here. Now, looking at my silver chart, important news here. We just recaptured the 50-day moving average. Check that out. So that is a good technical indicator for silver there. Caught a nice bounce down below $29. Again, I'd like to see a little bit of a move higher here. It looks like this consolidation, this bull flag pattern is still intact there. That's just me drawing the line real quick. But I am liking the shape of this silver chart for the moment. Bitcoin, meanwhile, still consolidating here at $61,236. That's down $386 as priced on Coinbase this morning. And the last thing I want to point out too on the charts here, this is the USD JPY chart. The decline of the Japanese yen as this chart moves higher. We're currently at 160.42. We went as high as 161.2 last night. So the Japanese yen is still falling. And this PCE report that we just got, we'll talk about this in a second, it's not going to be enough to really help the yen here. So we're probably looking at Japanese intervention in the Forex markets again, maybe sometime next week. Now let's look at the PCE change. Here is the headline number, United States PCE, or Personal Consumption Index, or Personal Consumption Expenditures. This is the change year over year. It was up 2.6% in May. That's versus a 2.7% increase last month. Pretty much in line with expectations. No big surprise here. Inflation is falling. It's just taking its sweet time. It's really just a very slight gradual move down in inflation. On a monthly basis, the headline PCE number, now that looks a little bit better because inflation was nothing in May, according to PCE, 0.0% month over month. So on average, prices for consumer products did not rise in May. Now, there may be some truth to that. I know a lot of you guys are very skeptical of these government numbers. I'm that way myself as well. But let's think about some of the headlines that we've seen, like Target lowering the price on thousands of items, a lot of other retailers following suit. Um, Plane airfares actually coming down because they're having trouble filling planes, fewer pilots being hired, fewer planes being ordered. So there may be some truth to these numbers here, guys, or at the very least, the trend is intact. No inflation for the month of May. Now, that doesn't mean prices are coming down. Remember, guys, inflation is a rate of change. Price is the absolute level. All this means is that prices didn't rise for the month. They're still all the way up there from all the previous increases. Now, core inflation, which strips out volatile food and energy, the yearly change came in also at 2.6% for May. That is a decline from the 2.8% level in April. Again, as expected, no surprise here. And we're seeing inflation is falling. That means prices are still going up, but going up slower. And well, it's just taking its sweet time. It's going to take a while still. We're still looking at probably another year before we get to that 2% target that the Fed just loves to talk about. And lastly, on a month over month basis, PCE inflation, core PCE, which takes out food and energy, was up 0.1%, down from 0.3. So no surprises here, guys. All of these categories, month over month, year over year, core, headline, they were all exactly as expected. So PCE is a non-story this morning. However, this Nike story, this is news. And we have seen stories like this all week. My moderator, Mish, we were doing our morning phone call this morning, and he made a really good point. It does feel like within the last week or two, there's been an inflection point. Company after company coming out with these profit warnings, these sales warnings, this disappointing guidance. It does feel like things turned a corner recently. Now you can add Nike to this list. Nike tumbles on sales warning as rival Adidas pushes ahead. Nike shares sank after the sneaker company's full-year outlook missed expectations, reinforcing investor concerns about waning demand and growth loss to German rival Adidas. The owner of the Jordan and Converse brands sees revenue declining in the mid-single digits in the company's current fiscal year, which began this month. Analysts had expected growth of about 2% this year at Nike, the world's largest sportswear company, according to estimates compiled by Bloomberg. The shares fell 14% in pre-market trading on Friday morning, wiping out about $16 billion in market value. Following the company's update last Thursday, the stock had already declined 17% over the last 12 months. And you can see Nike shares not doing so hot here. It's actually down 16.2% ahead of the open here, trading at $78.85. That's down $15.35. So we've got another retail stock here. Now, they're talking how maybe Adidas is stealing some market share here. So I'm not sure how much of this story, this decline in the forecast for Nike, is due to Adidas's growth and how much is due to a slowing consumer. My gut tells me this has more to do with the consumer being tapped out than any kind of resurgence in Adidas. We won't know until we start to see some quarterly reports from the two here. But there's another retailer, another discretionary spending kind of company that is really struggling in this environment. Now, here's one that's doing pretty well, actually. We got some good news on the Morning Update Live here. We occasionally dabble in optimism here. Apple's China iPhone shipments jumped 40% after steep discounts. It appears the solution to higher prices is indeed higher prices. Pay attention, other companies. iPhone shipments in China rose 40% in May off the previous month's pace of growth, despite heavy discounting by major retailers in the weeks leading up to the country's June shopping festival. Smartphone shipments climbed more than 13%, but foreign brands, of which Apple comprises the vast majority, grew almost 4 times faster, according to Bloomberg News calculations of official data. Foreign smartphones accounted for just over 5 million units of the total. The latest figures from China's Academy of Information and Communications Technology showed iPhone shipments began bouncing back around March and leapt more than 50% in April. That's partly because Apple and its Chinese resellers have been cutting prices since the start of 2024 in deals extending into the pivotal June 18th shopping festival. Before that, Apple had endured double-digit declines in sales after losing market share to Huawei Technologies. So those price cuts for the iPhone in China are working. We are seeing big surges. Now, this isn't an iPhone specific data point. That's one thing to keep in mind. This 40% number is foreign smartphone shipments into China is what they're measuring. But most foreign smartphone shipments into China are Apple iPhones. That also includes Samsung and other Western makes, but Apple makes up the lion's share of that category. So if we're seeing a 40% jump there, it's a good bet. That means we're selling a lot more iPhones. And Apple did make those steep price cuts. So it's probably all Apple growth that we're seeing at this point. Apple stock this morning is up about 0.75%, trading at $215.66. That's up about $1.60 this morning. And another retail company not looking so good here. L'Oreal sees slower beauty market growth as China struggles. The lipstick index is breaking down. This could be a first here. L'Oreal expects slower growth for the overall beauty market this year, according to its CEO, as weakness in China weighs on sales after years of rapid gains. Nicholas Hieronymus told investors at a JP Morgan event in Paris on Thursday that he now sees global beauty markets growing between 4.5% and 5% this year from previous forecast of 5% earlier this year. That's according to this L'Oreal spokesperson. So not a huge decline, right? 4.5% to 5% versus a previous forecast of 5%. So they lowered the lower end of the band. It's not like this is a panic moment, but this is a category that should be doing well. That's the thing here. It should be doing very well because during recessionary times, which maybe we're not in an actual recession yet, technically by definition, I would say these times are very recessionary. See all the stories we talked about this week. You'd think cosmetics would be doing well, but they're not. Hieronymus blamed the downward revision on a flat market in China, the representative added. That country had long been a growth engine for L'Oreal, with consumers snapping up its high-end cosmetics offerings. So, it looks like we're seeing slowing consumer activity, at least in the cosmetics area in China, although we're also seeing a big surge in iPhone sales in China. So I'm not sure between these two stories, do they cancel each other out? Probably not. I'm thinking the Apple story is more of a positive than the L'Oreal is a negative. L'Oreal stock was down about 3.25% yesterday, trading at 409.55. This is priced in euros. So not a good day for L'Oreal, but also not a terrible day. One more, we want to talk about this one that we got from Macro Edge. Shout out to Macro Edge on X. This is an excellent feed you guys should be following. Filling in some of the blanks, we talked about the Walgreens store closures yesterday, and Macro Edge is out with some numbers here this morning. Walgreens is considering closing up to 2,150 stores nationwide. So we said yesterday that they were going to be thinking about closing a significant number of stores. We didn't have any kind of numbers to quantify that with, but now Macro Edge is saying 2,150 pharmacies, or as many as, or up to that number, could be closing, which would result in a headcount reduction of about 57,000 employees from just this one company. Look, guys, and these are not all low-paying jobs, right? You've got cashiers working out in the storefront, but you've also got some very highly paid pharmacists in the back. Those guys are bringing home probably decent high six-figure salaries. 57,000 jobs could be lost, as much as 57,000 jobs could be lost in this story. And I just have to mention, guys, we're watching Walgreens is getting just bludgeoned here. Rite Aid. Also, I think Rite Aid, aren't they filing for bankruptcy at Rite Aid? We're losing pharmacies in the United States at an alarming rate. That just can't be good for consumer choice, for the quality that we're going to get at these pharmacies. And I don't know. I mean, pharmacies are already just a circus when you go there and try to get a prescription filled. And, well, when you see that market thinning out headcounts, that doesn't mean things are going to get better. And speaking of pharmaceuticals this morning, Supreme Court blocks Purdue Pharma's opioid settlement, threatening billions of dollars for victims. Guys, this is going to reverberate for years. Now, I'll be honest with you. I'm a little surprised by CNBC's language here, threatening billions of dollars for victims. So CNBC is almost crying foul here on this. But I got to be honest with you. The more I read about that Purdue Pharma settlement, it made me sick to my stomach. What this family, the Sackler family, and this Purdue Pharma company did to so many people, they got rich off of it, and then they wrote a check that was a fraction of the profits that they made, destroying all those lives. I mean, that settlement was disgusting. And if you were one of the relatives of one of the victims of this opioid epidemic, you should be insulted by that settlement. And I'm pretty surprised to see CNBC taking such a strong position against this court decision. I mean, I can guess why. Pharmaceutical companies spend a lot of money on advertising on CNBC's network, so I guess that shouldn't be too surprising there. The Supreme Court on Thursday blew up the massive bankruptcy reorganization of opioid maker Purdue Pharma, finding that the settlement inappropriately included legal protections for the Sackler family, meaning that billions of dollars secured for victims is now threatened. The court, on a 5-4 vote on non ideological lines, ruled that the bankruptcy court did not have the authority to release the Sackler family members from legal claims made by opioid victims. As part of the deal, the family, which controlled the company, had agreed to pay $6 billion that could be used to settle opioid related claims, but only in return for a complete release from any liability in future cases. Justice Neil Gorsuch, writing for the majority, said the Sacklers could have declared bankruptcy, but instead sought to piggyback on the company's own bankruptcy proceedings in an effort to resolve pending legal claims. They obtained all of this without securing the consent of those affected or placing anything approaching their total assets on the table for their creditors, Gorsuch wrote. Nothing in present law authorizes the Sackler discharge, he added. And, that makes a sense. Why should this Sackler family, who made billions of dollars killing people, why should they not be personally driven into bankruptcy to try? You can never make their victims whole. I mean, they lost loved ones, they lost everything, jobs, houses, lives. And the Sacklers were going to walk away from this writing a check, keeping many of the billions that they made doing this to people. That's not right. That's not justice. I mean, you can kind of tell where I'm leaning my opinion on this one. Now, Justice Brett Kavanaugh, another Trump judge, dissented, citing the impact of the decision on those who would benefit from the settlement. Today's decision is wrong on the law and devastating to the more than 100,000 opioid victims and their families, he wrote. 100,000, that number seems pretty low. I think that number is probably in the millions. As a result of the ruling, opioid victims are now deprived of the substantial monetary recovery that they long fought for and finally secured after years of litigation. The ruling means settlement talks would have to begin again with the possibility of no deal being reached. So, the counter argument against this decision was, hey, these people have already been through so much. At least they got that $6 billion settlement, and now you're throwing that out. Well, okay, I can see the reasoning in that, but that $6 billion settlement also gave this family that has blood on their hands on an unbelievable scale to walk away with billions of dollars of their own personal wealth intact. So I'm leaning more and more in favor of this, but they're also saying that this is going to have a lot of implications for future bankruptcy cases. So we may be hearing about this case quite a bit in the near future. And I just want to say thank you so much to Mr. Water 168. Thank you much, Mr. Water. He says, what will happen to oil prices under Trump and natural gas? Uh, my my guess is oil and gas stocks will not do very well. Um, I don't know. I mean, look, the president said, "Oh, gas was this when I was in office, and gas is that when I was in office." I don't know that the president really has that much of an impact on the actual price of gasoline. I think long term presidents can influence that, right? If a president clears the way for more refineries to be built in this country, that would lower gasoline prices. If the president clears the way for more exploration and production of domestic energy resources, that would eventually result in more supply hitting the market, which would lower prices. But these are not things that happen within a 4-year time span, within a president's term of office. So I don't think you're necessarily going to see much of an impact on prices. I think geopolitics is much more of an impact. The state of the global economy is much bigger of an impact. So I don't really think Trump versus Biden short term will have much of an impact on oil and gas prices. Now, the stocks, I think it will have an impact. And, like when Donald Trump took office and he cleared a lot of the way for more exploration and production, it resulted in a lot more investment in the oil and gas space. But a lot of the stocks of the oil and gas companies didn't actually do that well. They underperformed the rest of the market because there was more supply coming in. I mean, they had cleared the way for more supply, which causes prices in the long term to fall. So good for the consumer, bad for the investor, if you will. Um, that's just my guess. And natural gas, I think, will have more to do with what happens in Europe right now. The biggest producer of natural gas in the world, Russia, is having a hard time selling it into the European market. That has been very lucrative for American LNG companies. But I don't. I mean, Trump is out in the debate saying yesterday, if he wins before he even takes the oath of office, he'll have this war settled. He can't back that up. All right. He doesn't have that much power. He fancies himself this amazing negotiator, and maybe he is, but nobody's that good. You're not going to settle a war that killed 400, 600,000 people in 2 weeks just because the art of the deal. It doesn't really work that way. So I don't think the impact on gas and oil is going to be as big as the politicians make it out to be. Thank you very much, Water168. And thank you, Metal Seer, who says the mute button was Trump's helper. Yes, it absolutely was, Metal Seer. The mute button forced him to keep his mouth shut. And, I was talking about this all week with my cousins and family as we were having our vacation this week. We were just saying, like, the best thing Trump can do is just keep his mouth shut, which is going to be really hard for him to do. And surprisingly, he was able to do it. Uh, I mean, the mics were muted when the other guy was talking. So, I mean, he was pretty much forced to keep his mouth shut, but he still could have just like yelled something on stage and tried to get under Biden's skin or something like that and unnerve him, which I think was his strategy in the 2020 debates. It blew up in his face. It backfired big time. But yeah, the mute button, I definitely think was to Trump's advantage. Absolutely. Thank you, Metal Seer. And thank you to Uncle Fedster says, happy Friday, Jack. Happy Friday, right back at you, Uncle Fedster. And by the way, speaking of the happy Friday, guys, I just want to mention there will not be a Friday afternoon live stream this week. I'm still on vacation, so I'm not going to be able to do that one in the afternoon. We'll be back next Friday with the weekly wrap-up live stream. So I'll take this opportunity to wish you guys all a wonderful and magnificent weekend. Thank you very much, Uncle Fedster. And thanks to my man, Nashville Pasta Man, who says, we dabble in optimism here. Is that a sarcastic, right? Is that like, okay, Jack, right. Yeah, we dabble in it. Look, I occasionally foray into the optimistic arts. All right. I'm not entirely pessimistic here. All right. I do have Perma Bear written right there in invisible ink on my sleeve. But look, my negativity, my eternal pessimism, it's because I naturally seek out the obstacles to excellence. And therefore, there's an inherent optimism in my negativity because I just want to clear those obstacles so that we can all thrive and do very well. Maybe all of my seeing the worst in every scenario is really just thinly veiled optimism. I don't know, man. I'm grasping at straws here. How did that sound, Pasta Man? Did that sound a little too rehearsed? I don't know. But thank you for the super chat, sir. I appreciate the support of the channel. And thank you to Steve Boyd that says, why do melonheads have great marriages? Because they can't elope and always complete the honey-do list. Oh my God, melon puns. A new low for the channel. Melonheads have great marriages because they can't elope and always complete the honey-do list. I love it. Thank you, Steve Voitis, for the laugh this morning. I appreciate the support of the channel. And thanks to Viv B, who is, for some reason, this is not working here. Now all my clicks are catching up. All right, Viv B, thank you for gifting 10 Nobody Special Finance Channel memberships. I appreciate that very much. Guys, if you were gifted one of those memberships, let Viv know that you are grateful in the comments. Drop a comment and say thank you to Viv. Thank you for supporting the channel, Viv. I appreciate that very much. And Pasta Man is back, says prices for gas and oil will do well if he refills the SPR. I didn't even think of that, Pasta Man. That is an excellent point. Refilling the SPR. And I'll be honest with you, let's say hypothetically Trump gets in office and he does refill the SPR and it does send oil prices higher. He's going to whine about that a lot, right? He'll be sitting there saying, I had such low gas prices and I have to refill Sleepy Joe's oil pile and all this, right? He'll cast the blame. So maybe the SPR and the refilling of the SPR would give him cover politically just in case oil prices do rise through no fault of his own or through some fault of his own. He can point to the SPR and say that's why it's happening. So maybe politically it gives him an out. And I didn't even think of that one. Great point there, Pasta Man. I appreciate that. He should fill the SPR, but he probably won't because he's going to want his low gas prices so he can brag about them. So they may just leave the SPR where it's at. Thanks again, Pasta Man. Awesome point, brother. And thank you, Lisa B, for being a channel member who says, enjoy the last days of June, everyone. And thanks to the fam. Good vibes this morning from Lisa B. Thank you very much, Lisa. The same to you and yours. And thank you also to the Chronicles of the Red Drift Machine. I love that name. Wow, that's very literate. It's like a title of a book I want to read. I don't know what it's about. The Chronicles of the Red Drift. It says RFS can have an impact on fuel prices if repealed. What is RFS if repealed? I'm not sure what RFS stands for. Can somebody let me know in the comments what RFS stands for? Drill, baby, drill. Enjoy the rest of your vacation. Somebody let me know what that RFS. I'm sorry, Red Drift. I'm not sure what that stands for. I feel like I'm going to get a text from Mish or my dad any second now telling me what that means. I just can't. I'm not sure what that means. If can have an impact on fuel prices if repealed. Something about standards, renewable fuel standards. Is that what that means? We like get rid of the ethanol? Yeah, renewable fuel standards. Steve Whitus is saying. Thank you, Steve, for clarifying that. Yeah, I think probably if you repeal some of the renewable fuel standards, that could potentially lower fuel prices. Certainly, the electric vehicle mandates are going to have to be repealed because by 2030, there's just no way they're going to be ready to roll out 100% electric vehicles. Although the one thing about renewable fuel standards, like the ethanol standards, every politician wants to win an Iowa primary or an Iowa caucus, right? All those big corn belt states that are up for grabs in the primaries. A politician who comes out and says, I'm going to get rid of ethanol mandates is not going to win those primaries. And it's going to become an obstacle to holding the highest office in the land. And I think that's one reason why these ethanol mandates and the renewable fuel standards are still in place, even though they really just make no sense scientifically, economically, or environmentally. They're still there because of the politics of it. Thank you, Chronicles of Red Drift. I apologize. I couldn't figure out what RFS meant right away. And last but not least, thank you to the Crusty White Bread for becoming a Melonhead channel member. I appreciate that very much, Krusty. Welcome to the Melonheads. And thank you, everybody, for having your coffee with the Melonheads this morning. I want you guys to all have an awesome weekend. Again, no afternoon show today because I am on vacation. I'll be back in the studio on Monday, first thing. So have an awesome weekend, everybody. Spend some time with family. Enjoy this fine weather. Thank you to my magnanimous Melonhead channel members and Patreon supporters. Links down below to all that good stuff, should you feel so inclined. Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad. Love you guys. And everybody, till next time, live small and dream big.